Alright everyone, we start off today of course talking about Russia and Ukraine. Biden has been completely defeated, utterly macerated and humiliated by Russia. And now the legacy media and the Biden admin are scrambling to save face. You may have noticed that over the last 24 hours, in the wake of Russia's forces entering zones in eastern Ukraine, Putin recognizing essentially the sovereignty of those regions and saying, we're sending peacekeepers into the zone. You'll notice that his language is deliberately similar to the language used by the US government when it invades a country. There's a reason for this, which is why we need to cut out the goddamn overt warmongering and nation-building, world policing thing, because it just gives fodder to other groups of people to do the same fucking shit, and it leads directly to these things. To be clear, this is the fault of globalism. It's the fault of the trifecta economy where China is effectively the glue intermediary between Russia and the West anyway, and nobody seems to recognize this. It's also the fault of weak, feckless, incompetent, absolutely ignorant U.S. leadership, so-called, namely Joe Biden, who gets the buck. It stops there, even though he can't even fucking choose his own meals or change his socks. I realize he's not technically, literally to blame for the situation, although he was coherent when he was vice president when Crimea was invaded, so, yeah, you'd think you could eventually learn from your mistakes. Now, before I get into this, because the wagon circling, the propaganda, the blundering, the sheer incompetence of foreign policy here, I mean, it's so off the scale. This is worse than Afghanistan. It won't be billed that way. The propaganda will be more successful because more people will be more confused by it. They're trying to save Biden's limited career options. Mainly for Kamala, I think, at this point. But it is worse. Seriously worse than the situation there. This is going to cause a few more casualties and a couple of terrorist attacks. Keep in mind, though, before I continue my thoughts here, down below, if you're watching this video on YouTube, there will be a pinned comment with links to other video hosting sites that I use. Keep in mind, I make exclusive content every single day that go on those sites. It does not end up on YouTube. I will also presumably be doing a special live stream today. Of course, it is February 22nd, 22. This is, you're getting digits here. It's mimetic, and it's cool. So I figured I'm doing an occult live stream. Probably a bit longer than normal live streams. I'm also thinking about pushing back my major political announcement. Maybe I'll overlap it with the State of the Union. That would be kind of funny. Because, I mean, I'm doing a million things today. The more you pile on YouTube, the more the algorithm hates you. So, I don't know. I'll either do that later or it'll be like at some point in March, I think. Anyway, we got to talk about the Ukraine situation. So first and foremost, Russia has invaded. They are using the term peacekeepers as opposed to, hey, these are soldiers. They have weapons. No, we're sending them as peacekeepers. These regions have declared autonomy. We recognize their autonomy. So we're defending an allied state, autonomous regions that may or may not end up independent. It might be a buffer state, a pawn state, much like Ukraine already is for NATO, to be clear. Bet they regret that decision. Or they might just annex it outright like Crimea. Oh, well, you know, some treaty from the 1700s says it's ours. They speak Russian. They're ethnically more Russian. Who's going to fucking take it over? Who gives a shit? To be clear, NATO could have stopped this from happening long, long ago. We should have seen the writing on the wall, and instead of having this ambiguous policy, you had options. You could either effectively say we're hands off on Ukraine, they're independent, we don't really care what happens, and told Putin, look, we're not entering them into NATO, but, you know, we would appreciate it if you'd knock it off with any possibility of grabbing their land. While this requires you to trust that Putin won't ingratiate himself to the masses with imperialism and pretend to be neo-tanky and stuff like that, it's a possibility. It prevents NATO from having to do anything, mobilize, send troops, which costs a lot of money, risk World War III. That'd be nice. Or you could have just, you know, in the middle of the night, entered them into NATO and said, well, look, they're a NATO ally. If you do anything to them, we're going to respond with nuclear weapons, so just fucking try us. Those were two options. The latter is sort of a Kissinger-style mutually assured destruction option, but it's feasible. This is the sort of thing the U.S. has already done successfully, by the way, before. So have the Soviets. The former may or may not pay off, but you've tried. You've actually made an attempt. At least you get a gold star for effort, even if you flunk. At least you get that gold star. You can show it to your mom and say, look, Mom, I got an award. Biden could have took it back to his wife / operative mama and said, look at me, haha, as VP at the time, and said, look, I'm sure Putin will never invade Crimea now. We put a stop to it. But he's failed. No such attempt was made. Biden has been humiliated, and now his administration has to pretend not to recognize the fact that sending peacekeepers into an autonomous zone in a sovereign state next door that you were whining and dining as an ally at one time, yeah, that's invasion. It's not peacekeeping mission. It's not, hey, there's some ambiguity here. The reason why Biden, who otherwise would be inclined to say, well, this is even worse than just invasion, this is practically genocide, he'd love it. It'd give him propaganda fodder. What did Biden do a few days ago that prevents him from doing that? What did he do? He attempted to parley with Putin. Instead of casting him off as rabid and insane, which the United States has variously done, as an insane, a non-stable actor, this isn't true, but this is propaganda. You can portray him that way, and you can say, well, we're not going to negotiate with terrorists. You can do the big man thing. By the way, Trump probably would have done this. It may have actually worked, believe it or not. Or you can negotiate and hope that it works, and if it doesn't work, you look fucking stupid. And that's what Biden chose to do, and it didn't work, and he looks fucking stupid. He said, well, we want to have a summit with Putin. We want to prevent this. Yeah, we think that Russia's planning to invade, but please, Vladimir, talk to me. Won't you please talk to your old friend Joe Biden? And Vladimir remembered all the dirt on the Bidens that the Chinese and the Ukrainians, by the way, have, and said, no, fuck you. And strung him along for weeks with vain negotiation attempts and all this other shit. Well, by the way, Biden was laughed at even by the Ukrainian government. And Ukraine, meanwhile, in Kiev, I think that there's a new feeling there, and they're like, hey, Ukrainian sovereignty will exist longer if we don't fuck with the Russians too much right now. In fact, maybe we might want to partner with them. We're not going to end up in NATO. Why don't we just re-enter the Russian sphere? Who cares? I mean, is my ultimate question. Here's the problem. The way to deal with this, according to Biden and all these others now, is sanctions. Here's another problem for Joe that nobody's talking about. And by the way, I had made this video before, and then breaking news came out literally during the fucking video and confirmed exactly what I expected would happen. Biden, you'll remember, had taken sanctions off of Nord Stream, ostensibly and insinuatedly to put it on the table as a negotiating post. That is to say, well, Russia will be making all this money with Nord Stream. We can use that as leverage if they fuck around with anything. Whether it's Ukraine or not at the time, I don't think they cared, but we can use it as leverage. This is what Biden's people claim. At least Psaki did, and I think Kamala mentioned it too. Don't think he brought it up directly. Probably wise. Other people take the blame for it. Wonderful. You'll remember that. Here's the problem. The United States removed those sanctions, but that Nord Stream project effectively is run by the Germans. What did the Germans just do? They decided to cancel the full installation of the project. Now, this is going to cause problems in Europe. There might even be protests. If you know anything about Europe, it's not particularly energy self-sufficient, at least much of it. Prices are already sky high due to lockdown-related inflation and natural inflation due to funny money stimulus spending and all of the other problems in the economy in the world. Dutch inflation, for example, is worse than U.S. inflation. The price of goods here is markedly higher than it was when I first got here to the Netherlands. Markedly higher. As in, if you got a significant raise, you're making less money than before. If that's the case in the U.S., it's even more the case here in the Netherlands. Just try and go and get a nice steak. See if you can you find lamb chops? Oh shit. Yeah, so all the yummy stuff, it's like, oh fuck me, I have to eat nothing but rice probably. Don't worry, it's not that bad, but you get the idea. It's price problems. Part of that's energy related. You need energy to run the tractor. You need energy to run the plane. You need energy to run the truck. Energy is required. Who shuts the project down and reimposes the sanctions? It's not the United States. But I thought this was all a big negotiating tool, Joe. But the Germans are the ones that said fuck you to Vladimir Putin. Now, ain't that interesting? Once again, Joe Biden looks like he's not at the front of the pack of NATO or the West at large. But it doesn't surprise me. You have two problems. Well, three if you count Joe Biden simply being demented. He's not respected. Germany And France and the UK and other major Western players want more of the pie, number one. So they're already looking for an excuse to throw their diplomatic weight around instead of relying on the US. You got the rearming of Poland and other states. I think even the Netherlands is upping its military budget. And the Dutch would much rather build windmills than tanks. I think there are currently 14 tanks in the Dutch arsenal. Last about 10 minutes against Russia, by the way. I don't even know if they've got Abrams. I don't know what kind of tanks they are. I imagine they're probably last gen. Just being clear, the Germans are the only ones that took it seriously and then sold half of them to Poland. I think the Germans drill with wooden sticks in some cases. They're not even allowed to drill with actual weapons in many scenarios. Even plastic guns, they're too scary. Imagine how long they'd last in a war. Don't worry though, the second that they get shot and start suffering, they would immediately have swastikas waving around and go completely apeshit probably. Here's the thing. Biden looks weak. You've got European powers attempting to resurge, and others as well, Brazil and a few of these other countries. They're trying to throw their weight around, part of the Western world generally speaking, although they're part of BRICS. And then you've got a scenario where you've got this pressure, this outside pressure that's creating a situation where there's an opportunity, and you don't have a U.S. that's willing to lead. So Biden talks a big talk, but he can't walk the walk. Half the time he can barely walk literally. Don't you think this is a little bit of a problem? This could dissolve NATO. This could fracture the Western sphere. You'll end up with a British sphere and a French sphere and German sphere and a U.S. sphere and all these others. U.S. sphere would be one of the weaker under Joe Biden. This is why we need Trump back. This is why we need people with populistic and libertarian mentalities, people with mature worldviews capable of leading us away from globalism. Yeah, Trump was trying to tackle the Chinese, but supposedly he was being controlled by their nearest ally. That made a lot of fucking sense. No, it's Beijing Biden, and he's failed miserably. This is his second major foreign policy disaster, and it is his disaster. He chose to get directly involved at a high level to try to broker things. Then at the 11th hour, he pulled back and let the French take the fore. He was having Macron trying to prevail upon Putin. Oh my goodness. What are you thinking? This is a bigger blunder than Afghanistan by far. It was also predictable and it was preventable. There were people that warned about the situation. Here's what we should do now. We've got to get rid of any notion that we're going to win in Ukraine or anything, as though that was even something on the table. What we need to do is as follows. We desperately need to reassert U.S. authority in the Western sphere. I say this and not in the world policing sense. That's another part of it. We need to end the world policing. We need to reform the way the Western alliances work. That is, instead of dicking around in some island somewhere, why don't we protect our own borders, actually beef things up, focus on technology and strategy, and get away from the idea that the eternal opponent we're going to fight are people out in caves somewhere. No, you do realize you may still have to fight a symmetric battle someday. We've got the same problem in reverse, effectively, that we had after 9/11. We had geared our troops towards mass deployment in the sense of, hey, we're going to go into Vietnam or Korea or something, and then we ended up fighting people who disappeared into the local population in caves and shit. This was also kind of a problem in Vietnam, but there were also mass troop movements that you could deal with in tanks and shit like that. Now, we have to do the opposite. We need to reorient aspects of the military away from counterinsurgency and focus on symmetrical battles and propaganda. The problem is that we can't really do the propaganda thing as well either because the Western governments are the main purveyors of propaganda. Then the third thing, and this feeds into propaganda and censorship, is to get away from China. We need to buy local, make your own shit, buy less material altogether, convince U.S. firms to divest themselves in China, go somewhere else that's less abusive. We also need to stop emulating China at home. We need to crack down on tech censorship. It should be abolished completely. It's all government backed anyway. My private industry, my fucking ass. Get away from all of the looking like China because of a virus from China thing. It's a little bit mysterious how they got away with this. We need to put more pressure on them. They're the financiers of the Eastern Bloc, not Russia. Russia's just doing what's natural to Russia. It's imperialistic, but they're using the same terminology the West uses for a fucking reason. Because then they can call the West hypocrites. When Biden says, well, these aren't really peacekeepers, they're an invading army. Can he even do that with a straight face? Probably not. Putin has him over a goddamn barrel, and it's hilarious to see because, again, to all of the Biden fans that still remain, we told you so. We told you things like this would happen. Now you get to watch little Ukrainian children die, and probably Russians too. I'm sure they're very happy about that. That's about all. Peace out.